Welcome, dear sisters, mothers, grandmothers, to our weekly online cottage meeting for Moms for America. I'm Julene Jackson. I'm the National Vice President over cottage meetings. I have been attending or teaching cottage meetings for many years now. Hence, I think this is why I'm doing what I'm doing with Moms for America. It's just a voluntary position. It's just my way of giving back and trying to strengthen my community and my nation as we all are trying to somehow receive inspiration and revelation and learn the things that we need to so that we can do our part as well. And I just so commend you for being on board and being in these online cottage meetings each week. Girls, we are on the last seminar of the Healing of America series. We've done seminar 1, 2, 3. We're on the last section 2 today. So there's 4 sections in each seminar. We have 3 more classes today and 2 more after that. So, last week I know sounded familiar to you because it's like my war cry, and I hope it will be your war cry moving forward when people come to you distraught, not knowing what to do, so worried about, their homes, their children, the future of their country. And I hope that you will memorize those 4 points of Secretary Benson in that talk that we spoke about, because it gives people, I hope it has given you over the last 14 weeks we've been meeting, something to focus on and to redirect from some of the hysteria that I feel sometimes when I watch too much news kind of thing. So if you can tell them, look, turn to God, increase your time, increase your faith, be praying, spend more time in the Word. I have to tell you, just this morning, I was getting ready for class and my husband came in and he said, Julene, I was just on Glenn Beck. He said, I was at the gym and I was on the treadmill and I was getting so angry about some of the commentary that he was hearing about, the Chauvin case and the decision that came down yesterday. And so I said, I have too much work to do. And he got off the treadmill, and on his way home from the gym, he called a man by the name of Mr. Bob Woodson. He is the president of the Woodson Center in Washington, D.C. He's on Fox Television News. He's an 82-year-old Black man. He's written many books. He is one of our heroes. He's been in our home where he's eaten at my table. I love and adore him. Just Google Bob Woodson. And anyway, so Al said, I called Bob Woodson on the way home from the gym. This was just like an hour ago. And I said, Bob, I need you to talk me off the ledge. I am so mad about, this false narrative that they're promoting right now in the news. And Bob said, look, Al, it's like David and Goliath. We are David, and it looks pretty, we're up against this Goliath right now. But he said, we need to remember the Mother Teresa approach. We meet our enemies, or we meet people that we disagree with love, and we increase our faith and we remain vigilant, because we know in the end, just like Dr. Skousen last week we talked about, in the end, God prevails. We win. So we have to be up and doing something to justify God to intervene. And God doesn't need a majority of people. He just needs enough people that are looking to him. And that's exactly what Bob Woodson said to Al. And it calmed Al down. And then he proceeded to call Glenn Beck. And Al, my husband, was, I think, the first guest on Glenn Beck's show today. So listen to the podcast tomorrow. And Al said, Glenn Beck gave me about 5 minutes, Julene. And we had a very good exchange and conversation. And so, my husband felt compelled on the spot. I got to get off this treadmill. I've got work to do, And so you're going to be feeling this moving forward. God, what can I do? And as you think about it, he will open opportunities. He will send, little ideas to your mind, what you can do to shore up your home, your marriage, your children, your little neighborhood, because it's going to look different for all of us. That was my husband this morning. So anyways, we are talking about, we're in our 4th, the healing, the restoring the charter of freedom. We're about solutions today. Now, girls, that doesn't mean you have to be a part of every single solution that we're going to give, but we're going to give solutions. And then I want you to be prayerful as you continue to learn and study and show up each week. And as you pray about it, God will open doors of opportunity to be a part of some of these solutions that we're going to talk about today. So girls, we finished the 16-week seminar May 5th in 2 more weeks. And then we're going to take a 3-week break, and then I'm going to reteach the 16-week seminar. Now, typically, I wasn't planning on doing that, but about halfway through the seminar, I just felt that, I knew I had to take these seminars probably 3, 4, 5 times before it really began to sink in. And we don't have a lot of time. It took me over the course of 5 years. I don't know. I don't know if we have that kind of time anymore. So I just felt, and on the advice and counsel of some people I admire, said, Julene, you need to teach this again almost immediately. And I would recommend, girls, you taking these classes. You've already had the manuals, you've filled in the blanks. And now as I teach, you'll really be able to write in on the sides. And then this will be your script for someday, if God tells you, to teach in your little neighborhood. You're building your little scripts of how to teach these classes to mothers in your community, 3, 4, 5 women. And I promise you, if you were to start with 3 or 4 or 5 women and you start to teach these classes, and you will talk about it, and the people that are attending will tell their friends, and before you know it, you'll have 10 women. You'll have 13 women. I mean, that's exactly how it was with us when, 6 little moms in Oregon 12 years ago got together and started studying the 5,000-year leap, a book that I knew nothing about, because Glenn Beck said, moms, get together, study these principles, and then teach them to your children. And here, 12, 13 years later, I'm teaching mamas around the country. And I would have just laughed 12 years ago, when someone would have told me that would have been the case with our little cottage meeting of a couple women or in Oregon. So I'm just feeling, it also will give you an opportunity to invite your kids, your neighbors, your sisters, your whoever, and you can bear witness a little bit of what you've learned. And I'm telling you, women understanding these principles are the Lord's secret women. It's like we'll be the sleeping giants that will rise up, these mamas who now know that they're fighting for the livelihood of their children and their grandchildren's future. And so anyways, we will start our seminars again on June 2nd. And so today we are on section 2 of seminar 4. We're going to talk about some solutions for healing the community and the state. Now, remember, number 3 out of those 4 things that Secretary Benson encouraged us last week to do is to learn the Constitution from the viewpoint of the founding fathers. That way you're becoming an informed and knowledgeable citizen. Then you will take that knowledge to strengthen your homes and your communities. So one of the most important aspects in healing of America is healing the community and the state, because it is the closest governmental entity to the individual and to our families. It's where we live. It's where we work. It's where our kids go to school. It's where we attend church. It's where we recreate, the parks and those kind of activities. You can really, I think we could all bear testimony. Yeah, the community definitely shapes and molds our family and our children. Therefore, we have every right to dictate upon which standards of morality and decency and safety that we want to have in these communities. And our founding fathers said that is where those standards should be established at the local level. It says, it's Principle 21, in order to preserve the keystone to preserving freedom is strong local self-government. Local government, our founders intended for us to determine these standards of morality and decency and integrity. So I was just in Detroit like 3 days ago. So we have a boy who lives in Detroit, Michigan. Now, I don't know about you, but I have never been to Detroit just because I've heard scary stories, and it's not a destination spot. And I'm like, who in the world would ever want to live in Detroit? Well, you get a kid that moves there, and now I'm going to Detroit. So I've had people tell me, Detroit a few years ago was a blighted, burned out community, vacant, buildings and no place you want to raise your children. Well, a few years ago, some businessmen got together and they decided to revitalize that community. And as we took a tour of Detroit, I thought, this is lovely. So, you know, up until a few years ago, you weren't wanting to buy real estate in Detroit and hopefully have your children have a good experience. But communities can turn around if they pool together and decide that, hey, we're not going to take this. We want better. And so it's important where our children live. You know, Moses was instructed by the Lord to organize the government so that most of the attention could be given to problems at the local level. Even Moses got that in Deuteronomy and Exodus, both chapter 18. It talks about how Moses made captains of 10s and 50s and captains of 1,000 and over 10,000s. And he wanted the problems to be solved at the lowest level possible, because that's where problems are best solved, when they're closest to the problem, not 3,000 miles away for DC to tell me what's best in my schools or in my community. And so this was a core principle that the founders understood, that only limited and carefully defined powers should be given to DC. All the others should be referred back to the states and to the people respectively, that the states should, that their rights should be numerous and undefined. And, you know, our founding fathers were correct in the Constitution in that very first amendment, where they said, look, DC should not be able to make laws respecting religion or prohibiting it. That should be held at the local level. We want our kids, remember our founders said, to be taught religion, morality, and knowledge. And our founders wanted the communities to decide what levels of morality, decency, and safety, not Washington, D.C. And our founding father, James Madison, even in the Federalist paper, he says there, the powers reserved to the states will extend to all objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern their lives, their liberties, and their properties. All right. So when we become knowledgeable and informed about the Constitution, we therefore take those principles and we apply them within our communities. So the first step to becoming involved locally is to heal our education. So we keep talking about education, the war, you know, how it's become almost a tool against our children. And isn't it interesting that God intended education to become a vital tool for concerned citizens to heal America at all levels? But whenever God has a program of truth, Satan has a counterfeit program. And you can see he's using education as a means almost to destroy our country now. I mean, young people are some of the greatest advocates of socialism and Marxism now and entitlement. And it's because the education has turned against, you know, what it was intended to be. So in a recent study, there were 5 things that parents are most concerned about with their education. Number 1, they're concerned that they don't have enough say about what is going on in the schools or the classrooms. Number 2, they're worried about the increasing anti-God, anti-religion, anti-morality theme that's going on in the school systems. Number 3, they're concerned about the anti-Americanism that's being taught, disloyal, you know, notions about our founding fathers in the Constitution. And lastly, actually it's 4 things, sorry, that they feel their kids aren't safe at school anymore. You know, they're just not physically safe and probably not spiritually safe as well. So let's just talk about these concerns a little bit and give a solution to each one. So the parents are concerned that they don't have any control. It used to be, you know, back in the olden days, that school was just really an extension of the family. So the family really had the God-given responsibility to raise up the child, and the education was an extension of the family. And, you know, here comes along 100 years ago, our Horace Manns and our John Deweys that want to change that want to make the family an extension of the school instead. And how do they do that? Well, they remove God and they remove the influence of mama, who's the primary teacher. So you make that school day nice and long. Those kids leave at 7:30 and they don't come home till 5 or 6 if they're in high school and they have sports kind of thing. So what would be the solution? Well, you create competition. All right. So the school system doesn't have such a hole, like you don't have any other options to teach your children. And we have seen this with COVID. More and more families, mamas are thinking about homeschool, whereas they never thought that they could do it or they were qualified to do it. So there's homeschooling options. Just a few weeks ago, when I went to, well, along with some of the other mamas in the call, to a conference for schooling, best education for students together from Freedom Works. They had this woman spoke. She's the founder of Classical Conversations. Here is her. She gave me a brochure and it has all these reading lists and curriculum and books they use. This is Classical Conversations is a homeschooling program. And I liked what she had to say. It was founded 30 years ago. It's like $1,500 a year for high school, $500 for elementary. Kids do their program, their curriculum 4 days a week. And on the 5th day, they go to a little classroom setting, usually in a church, where other people families that are participating in this homeschooling program meet for 6 hours, and mama or dad has to be there. So everyone's learning together. So one day a week, they do have instruction. Over 125,000 students are being taught this way. Over 50,000 families are participating. It's in 50 countries. Classical Conversations. I'm just giving you an example of this. I like this because one day out of the week, all the kids meet together and mamas meet together with other moms. And so you can kind of, back each other up and make sure, am I doing this the right way? How are you doing here? Kind of thing. So you're not going it alone. She said, look, homeschool it's not lone school, homeschool. And I think that's sometimes what mamas think. Oh, I'm 100% responsible if I don't know if I'm up to this task. I liked what she said. Homeschool is not lone school. We study classical literature, and this classical literature, she said, is what is going to save Western civilization. We use original sources. And she said, when mamas are waking up to these original sources, she will be the one, grandma will be the one to preserve this Christian culture that we've gotten away from, because kids in the school aren't reading a lot of these classics because they mention God. And we can't have any mention of God in books anymore. So kids are not reading books with mention of God. So what do they have? They're getting godless literature. And so she said, successful homeschoolers should rarely be at home because they're out learning. Homeschooling is not, the learning does not really take place at home. It's you take them out on site and you learn together with your children. And she said, look, we don't need to worry about our kids becoming socialized. We want them to be civilized. That's in the past, that was like, well, I don't want to homeschool my kids because, they might become deficient in socialization. And she said, that's not the problem with kids nowadays. They're not civilized. So Google her, Classical Conversations. I thought it was fascinating. I know there's another beautiful mom, I'm not sure if she's on today, who does the good and the beautiful. And that is a homeschooling curriculum also. I think the little gals from Idaho who started that, and that has taken off. That is so popular. I'm hearing more and more moms talk about the good and the beautiful. Also, grandmas, we might have to help our children augment and help take these grands out on some of these, adventures, educational adventures. So I just think moving forward, we might have to change our thinking that, we just send our kids to school for 12 years and the schools do their thing and then they come home to us, because we've seen what our kids are being taught in school might actually be their undoing. So we are going to have to get more involved with the way we teach our kids. And that's why, one of the reasons I began my devotional in the morning with my children, because I was worried about what they're being taught in school. So I would arm them with principles of truth, morality, the Bible, and I would teach them a little bit about history. And that made me feel comfortable sending them off to public school. So every mama has to do it a little bit differently. But anyways, competition. So just don't assume that public school is your only option. There's private schools that you can send your kids to. I'm hearing more and more about moms that are just like 4 or 5 moms that are just starting a little co-op on their own and teaching in their little communities. And so avoid the lure of easy money disguised in the form of charter schools or school vouchers. So I've never sent my children to charter schools or school vouchers, so I can't speak personally to this, but you need to know that charter schools are still funded by the government, the federal government and the state government. So yes, charter schools are less regulated and they're more specialized, but they do receive money from the government. So there are always strings attached when you take money from the government. Same with school vouchers. You know, they say they'll give you vouchers so you can educate your kids at different schools, but oftentimes they won't allow you to use that money for religious schools. So once again, you're beholden when you take any funding that has come from the government. Second solution, replace state and federal monies with local funding. And we will talk about that, but you can show up, enough mothers get together and just say, we don't want the state, we don't want the federal money. We want to be able to use the local monies from local taxes to determine how to do things in our community. Now that would be a radical concept, but that's exactly, how it would be done and what it would look like. Also, I just want to say on Friday, I'm speaking with Glenn Kimber. It's a 2-hour cottage meeting, and I think you might have gotten an email or will, but he has, if you have any questions about this, he has run school academies for over 2-3 decades. So he can specifically answer any questions you have about what this might look like. Well, how do I tell my city council and school board we don't want to take the money? He will give you examples. He can answer any question that you might have if you want to get on that call Friday night. Okay, concern number 2, clipping along here, girls, as I always do, a mile a minute. I hope you're following me. Concern number 2, parents have little or no say about the selection of textbooks in the school. Do you feel that way? Like you can't go in there and demand that they read, Where the Red Fern Grows instead of whatever your kid is reading or not reading. So, as a result, many kids, many falsehoods are taught in schools because of the textbooks have been changed through the years. No matter how good your teacher is, if she's limited as to, what she can have the kids read. So the solution would be when parents or city council are in charge, they can set up parent advisory committees. So what you do is you make yourself known as you go into your city council meetings and you say, I'm not happy with what my kids are or are not reading. Can we set up an advisory board made up of parents so we can discuss the textbooks that are being, and you get 10 moms doing that at the city council, and they're going to be hard pressed to not say, okay, yeah, let's set up an advisory committee and some of you moms can sit on it kind of thing. And so concern number 3, patriotism is not being taught in the school, the love of our founders and the Constitution. Remember, I told you my kids in Oregon weren't allowed to pledge allegiance because it mentioned God. And in that town, that was offensive to some people. So my children were never allowed to pledge, that kind of thing. So what can we do? We're told here, Secretary Benson said in his talk, get patriotic books back into the school system. We must teach our children about the spiritual roots of this great nation. We must become actively involved in supporting programs and textbooks in the public schools that teach the greatness of the early patriots. And he recommends gifting books to the history teachers in your school. We have done that. We have given the 5,000-year leap to several of our history teachers in the schools our kids have attended. Now, girls, they give an example of a constitutional library that you could gift to just, and I didn't go through the administration to give these books to the teacher. I just showed up at parent teacher conference with some books in hand to my history teacher and I gave it to him. And so I would really recommend I Love America series. It's a 2-part series. You could get them at kimbercurriculum.com. And I have used these books in my home, in my family devotional for years with my kids, clear up until probably 14. 4 to 14. So get these books first. Gain a testimony of these books first, the ones that you like the most. Then do something radical. Show up at parent-teacher conference with a book in hand and give it to the teacher and say, I have taught this to my children or my grandchildren the last couple months. It is so helpful and effective. I just would like to give this as a gift. Imagine that. They say The Making of America is another great book. This is the most comprehensive book on the Constitution from the viewpoint of the founding fathers. There's a student version of this that you can get at Kimber Curriculum. In my cottage meeting that I taught like 8 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, when I taught this book, it took us 2 years to get through that student manual of The Making of America. We read every little paragraph, filled in every blank. But I'm telling you, we were changed women. So I can bear witness of this book. It took us 2 years, 2 hours every week in our cottage meeting. I would highly recommend. It tells you exactly why the founders gave us worded certain things in the Constitution, what they were thinking. And then yes.
Julian, I have a quick question.
Yes.
With the gifting of these books at parent-teacher conferences, have you seen any of the teachers actually using it? Because aren't they hamstringed by the principal?
I mean, maybe the ones that don't want to teach it will say that. But the ones that love America, that love God and love the Constitution, they're thrilled. So, the reality is you can't force them to teach it, but the ones, and there's a lot of great teachers out there that love America, and they know, that there's more to the story than what they're being told they can teach. You can teach when you're in that classroom, any teacher knows you can teach. You can slant things. You can open up, little stories and ideas that you're not being monitored 24/7. So, it's almost like you give it to them, then you pray. What I would do is I would pray over it. Dear God, please soften the heart of the teacher that she will read this and that he or she will read this. And then you've done your part, Marcy.
Right.
I mean, that's really, God just wants to see us doing our part. These books are so good. The real George Washington, the real Thomas Jefferson, the real Benjamin Franklin. I have read all these books to my children, so I read to my kids at night. And these are really good books, great stories, great discussions. And so, you have to be reading these things before you feel comfortable gifting them to a teacher. I told you, I gifted this book to the governor of Utah. He read it. He wrote me a letter about it. So you just never know. You just got to act in faith, girls, and do the craziest things, giving a book to a teacher, praying over it, and then letting God do the rest of the work. So concern number 4, we're afraid to send our kids to school just because we don't, with all the guns and all the stories. And I'm telling you, just last week, a kid was killed in Tennessee. Did you hear that? In March, a 15-year-old in middle school was killed in Arkansas. February, some policeman was trying to break up a fight at school at a basketball game. The police was killed. And so we get it. We're worried about just the safety in some of our schools. So what would the solution be? Well, we need to reverse that formula that John Dewey instituted, where we break up the kids and we send them to high school and middle school. And so no one knows what the other kid's big sister can't look on little brother. And so now peer pressure is becoming more important than the family unit. So there was about 2 years that I sent all my kids. It was a private school in Utah called American Heritage, from 12th grade down to kindergarten, and they all went to the school in the same building. It was the most fascinating experiment to see how those kids would talk around the dinner table, and they would say, oh, I saw you walking down the hall with such and such, and they were kind of watching out for each other. And then it got to the point where the kids didn't have to leave at 3 different times and go on 3 different buses, because one of my girls was old enough, she would load everyone up in the Suburban and drive all the kids to school, and their little conversations going to school and back. Studies have shown that there is a decline in drugs, vandalism, violence, and inappropriate behavior when kids can go to school together. And I saw that a few months ago when I was up in Pennsylvania in the Amish country in Lancaster, where all the children are educated in the one room schoolhouse, like the little red schoolhouse, although none of their schools are red, they were white. But as I would drive around that community, like every mile and a half, they have these little schools. And I think only 100 kids, completely like they did over 100 years ago, from I think 15 down to kindergarten. They all go to school together. And I would look in the playground, and 14-year-old boys are running around with 6-year-old kids, and they're all just playing together, and they all kind of have each other's backs. And so we can institute, this age group integration again. And that might look like a private school, that might look like a co-op. How wild would that be if you stood up at your next school board meeting and told the story of how it used to be, why the one room schoolhouse is so important, this concept of integrating the age groups again, and just see what kind of discussion you should get there. And then this whole idea of no trespassing. Remember the days when you could just go to school if you wanted to eat lunch with your kid, and you could just kind of walk in to the cafeteria and sit down. And over the years, now you got to fill out, put your information on the computer. And I really have felt the last few years that I wasn't welcomed in public schools the way I used to be. And that teachers didn't really appreciate you just showing up to volunteer in the classroom anymore. And so one of the solutions is take away the power of the boards, the school boards, at the state level to control by assigning them to be advisory only, and do not accept monies from those who would control local education. So once again, when we take money at higher levels, we just kind of have to go along with their rules. Now, I get it. In this day and age, you don't want just anyone walking off the street and being able to walk into your kid's classroom. But I have noticed it used to be parents were so grateful for any time I would go spend in the classroom. And over the last, I would say 5 to 6 years, there aren't sign-up sheets anymore for me to go volunteer. It's like that they don't want you to be in the classroom. It's just harder to get in the classroom and to be a homeroom parent anymore. And so, breaking that down exactly means, again, you're going to have to start to show up to some of these city council meetings and to some of these school board meetings consistently, or joining a group where 3 or 4 can take each meeting and have a representation, and keep coming up with raising your hand and that kind of thing, and putting the idea into them that we don't want the federal money. We don't even know if we want state money. Let's just keep it, the local taxes. Let's get some parents back into the solutions here. We want more involvement. How is that going to look like? Okay, the second step to becoming, to healing our communities is, the second step to becoming involved locally is to heal our communities. The first concern would be, we just feel disconnected. Who in the heck is on our city council? When was the last time I went to a city council meeting? Well, we're going to have to start to go. And the solution would be, as we go, we're going to become acquainted with these people on the board. When we go to meet the candidate night or to some of the caucuses, you really do get very good face time, and you can ask them, what are you doing to uphold the Constitution? What standards of decency are you enacting in my community? How can I ensure more patriotic books or textbooks can be in my child's school? Where do you stand on access to pornography at school? You can ask them these questions, hold their feet to the fire, because mostly people aren't going anymore. So these people are just, they can do anything they want because no one is asking them these uncomfortable questions. So attend the meetings, and you also, several times it's going to be mentioned here that the Thomas Jefferson Center for Constitutional Studies, you can ask them if they want to become certified. you know, the TJC has a little test you can take to become a certified voter, to certify candidates. So if they really say, oh yeah, I'm a conservative, I'm going to uphold the Constitution. Well, would you be willing to become a certified candidate through the TJC and take a test so I can see exactly, and that would be a great thing. Look, you'll be able to promote it in your campaign. You're a certified constitutional, candidate. And so you could, instead of attacking them, you could help encourage them. This would be a good thing. And so, our second concern would be unwholesome activities that are invading our community. Okay, so as I'm thinking, let's see, what would that be? Would it be porn shops? Would it be strip clubs? I mean, you probably don't live in those areas where those things exist, but where you do probably have is movie theaters, that you can't find any family films being shown at the movie theaters because R-rated movies bring in so much more profit than the family films. So what you could do is whenever there's a family show at the movie theater, you go. And even if you can't go, you go in, you talk to the manager and say, I want to give you $100 donation because I want more movies like this to be playing in my community. I want families to be able to take their kids to family films instead of this trash. And so imagine if you got together in 10 families, every time there was a family movie, you would go and you would make donations or just say, I want to buy 10 tickets, free tickets, just keep them available for any, however you might want to promote, free tickets to the movie. But, what to do in our community is just as important as, what not to support. We need to know that, when there's rodeos and fairs and family nights in the parks, even if we don't have kids anymore, we need to just, our presence there tells the community that we care, that this is important and we're supporting, family events. Not to mention little potlucks or family movie nights in the community. I'm sure if I were to open it up for questions, I'm sure that many of you have done these things. They're good for the community. You talk about what's going on when you gather together. So I know it takes time to have a little barbecue on a Saturday in the summer, but it's so worth the relationships, and you're able to talk about the concerns and what you like at the school system, what you don't like. If we don't know each other, how can there be strength in numbers if we don't even know the names, of our people that live in our community, let alone our neighborhood? Girls, we're going to talk about something we could spend the whole time talking about, is media pollution invading our homes, pornography, really. I just want you to know, this might be someone's thing, that this is what you're going to fight. The Lord is telling you to stand up and get involved in your community, but it is, the effects of this degeneracy and filth is felt for generations in families that have been plagued with it. They say 40% of adult men are addicted to some form of pornography. 80% of kids are exposed to it by age 10. 18 to 35, the age 18 to 35 of women we're seeing the highest increase of pornography in girls ages 18 through 35. It really is the plague of this generation. So what do we do? Well, unfortunately, a lot of these things we can't handle in the city council or the mayor. We have to go vertically up. It can't be solved at the local level. So we have to send it vertically up the line of our state legislature and our federal legislators. And we need to hold our state legislators to their feet to the fire, and even our elected officials in DC, because they can pass laws making the transmission of this illegal. Did you know the Muslim countries, many of the Islamic countries, don't allow for pornography? A lot of the pornography comes from foreign countries, so it's going to take federal legislation to block it. And so, this is a big ask, but our founding fathers, many people will say, oh, we can't legislate morality, we gotta free speech, we gotta allow it to exist. Well, if we don't stand up for decency, morality, we will essentially be promoting immorality. Just like we took God out of schools, and what crept in godless doctrine. And so we're going to be promoting immoral behavior if we don't stand up and take a stand for God's law. It's exactly what the founding fathers used. They used the biblical standard of morality. Our inalienable God-given rights came from God, and we defend these laws because God created us. He knows what protects us and what brings us happiness are the laws he gave us. And we start removing our creator's laws from our life and we have misery. And who wants us to be miserable? It's certainly not God. It's the opposite. And so our founders, in the 5,000-year leap, the very first principle the founders talk about, that the most reliable basis for sound government and good, just human relations is based on natural law. That is God's law. And so we need to be wearing our legislators out. Why are we allowing? There are countries around the world that do not permit the transmission of pornography. And so that's, pray over that one, how you can be involved with that. Our concern also about indecent materials in local stores and libraries. Isn't it interesting that all, the raunchy headlines in magazines and so forth are at the eye level of children when we go to the checkout stand? So mama's busy getting her purse and putting the groceries on the conveyor belt, and the kids are getting, an eyeful looking at those magazines. And I know we all have stories about asking the manager to put covers over them. And that's so good. And even in the libraries, when was the last time I was in the library? But there's inappropriate things in the library, and we just have to continue, to make the powers to be aware of that, dig out the dirt legally and decisively. And we also need to ask our legislators, what are you doing to prohibit the sale of pornographic material or the transmission of this kind of stuff into our community? Put them on the spot when you go to the meet the candidates or the town halls and hear what they have to say, and let them know you're not happy with it, that there are countries out there that don't allow this. Why are we allowing this? The third step to becoming involved locally is to healing our state. So are you kind of getting the difference at each level, what we can do to individually heal our home, our individuals, our families, what we can do at the education level, what we can do in our community, and now we're at what we can do at the state level. So number one, it says, know your constitutions. Not only know your US Constitution, but read your state constitution. I have not read Maryland state constitution. And so, and once again, it talks about, making sure these candidates, these men and women are in office, gets certified with the TJC, make it a positive for them. Hey, this is probably going to fare well for you to be able to boast that you're constitutionally certified by the TJC. But as we understand these principles in our state constitutions and our federal constitutions, we will always have a position of strength when we're speaking to a candidate or to anyone, because we're based on educating ourselves instead of emotionalism that we see so many people are just going off of my feelings. And we know emotionalism draws a person to fear and to hate and even to violence that we see, looters and rioters that are just based on emotionalism. And secondly, it says you got to attend those meet the candidates and those caucuses and vet those candidates to make sure that they're virtuous and they're good and they're wise. They're steeped in constitutional wisdom and that they're godly, they're good, and that there's some personal worthiness there. They're going to be able to articulate why how they're defending morality, decency, and safety. Number three, once again, you can ask them because they all take oaths of office. Can you tell me what you're doing to defend the oath of office that you took to sit on the city council? Imagine if you ask that kind of question to them. They might hem and haw, and you could say, well, the oath that you've sworn to uphold and defend, can you prove it to me? How do you study the Constitution? When was the last time you read the Constitution? Just ask them these kind of questions. Number 4, because of all the time it takes to track legislation, it's a good idea to join like-minded groups. So Moms for America will give you a heads up on the national legislation. There's 3 pieces of legislation they're tracking right now. You can find that on our website. But I'm talking about local legislation. And at our little cottage meeting in Utah that I attended for 10 years, we would join with other groups, activist mom groups that were monitoring the state capitol and the local legislation there. You know, remember, girls, it's so important to know we can't solve every problem out there. And if we try and solve them one at a time, we'll get burnout and we'll dilute our resources. So, and every time you kind of get a handle on like maybe core curriculum, common core, remember that came out about 6-7 years ago. As long as you kind of get a handle on that, then our enemies of freedom will come up with 4 or 5 more things to attack the family. And so you just get worn down through the years. So remember what we do. We learn what part of the Constitution was broken to allow that problem to occur. We kind of categorize the problems, and then we can focus on the parts of the Constitution that need to be repaired. So that's why we studied the Constitution as it was, as it is now, the problems with the Constitution, and how we can heal the Constitution. And next week, we specifically talk about what we do to heal the Constitution. And when you do that, you don't get worn out, or you don't get burnt out trying to whack-a-mole all these problems, you know, that are popping up here, because you're basing your solution on principle. And I'm telling you, girls, principle is so invigorating to talk about, because principles are universal and they transcend political parties. That's why if you can memorize these 28 principles, you will be so powerful, because instead of playing tit for tat over issues with people, you will quote a principle that has been broken, and what has been broken in the Constitution, and what we need to do to heal it. And there's nothing emotional about principle. It's fact. It's rooted in truth. It's rooted in God's truth. And you will become a really persuasive with people that love God and are seeking solutions. They just don't know what to do. These 28 principles that change the world are powerful. I would recommend memorizing them. And you can do it. I've had to memorize. You can do it. It's not that hard to memorize. And here's a little book with the 28 principles. You can get it from the National Center for Constitutional Studies. They'll send you these little bookmarks for free. And I just carry them around with me, and I just memorize those principles. Okay, girls, we're cruising along. We're almost at the finish line here. Attend party caucuses and conventions so your voice can be heard. Become delegates. Support legislation that is, you know, pro-God, pro-family, pro-religion. Be vigilant by attending peaceful picketings. My little sister, she told me on Friday she went to a See Your Smile rally in the park near her house, because moms are getting sick and tired of these little kids having to wear masks 8 hours a day. And I'm like, good for you, sis. So when you hear about these things going on, show up. Also, public protests. We have every right in the Constitution to attend protests. And so, you know, I like to tell people, yes, I was at that January 6th protest. There was over 1 million people there. From my standpoint, it was beautiful. These were God-fearing people that were concerned about their country and taking a stand. And this is, to be honest with you, I marched from the White House to the Capitol. And this was my perspective. And I will tell people this, it's our right to publicly protest and to assemble. But, you know, obviously, I say the people that broke into the Capitol, I saw what they looked like. And they were not a part of the people that have attended the rallies and the protests I've been to the last several years. I say they were Antifa. And I say, I believe the Antifa broke into the Capitol And then the Trump supporters were let in because at that point they opened up the doors. And these little people, they didn't know that probably that wasn't a good place to go, the couple hundred that were there. But there was over 1 million people there. If they wanted to do some real damage, they could have, and they did not. I mean, we saw people singing patriotic hymns and praying and picking up trash. And it was so inspiring. And then, you know, at the end, we all were there and we're like, first of all, this doesn't look like the people that, you know, I spent the last 5 hours standing in line, you know, to listen to the speakers. And so just know, don't be afraid of peaceful protest. I think it's so interesting. In Washington, D.C., there was a protest on Saturday night no one will ever know about. 200 people protesting the police. It got violent. They were throwing things at the police officers. They marched around town. They lit the beautiful statue in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C. of Christopher Columbus. They lit him on fire and spray painted his face. Now I found that story in the last section of the local newspaper. It was completely buried. And so I'm just saying that protests go on. We do not have to be a part of the violence that is being tolerated by some parties, you know, so don't be intimidated by the way, you know, people that attended that January 6th protest have been portrayed. You have every right to be there and to let America know that, wait a minute, we're not happy with what has happened. Also, send letters or emails. Me and my husband are going to be a part of banning Costco the first Saturday in May because they're no longer selling Mike Lindell's pillows. I mean, Bed Bath & Beyond, Kohl's, they're all pulling Mike Lindell, who's a great patriot. He's so supportive of Moms for America. Every time our president calls him, he writes a $50,000 check. The next day it's in the account. This man loves his country. And so we're going to be protesting. We'll be writing our letters to Costco, and we'll not be going on, if you can look it up, ban on Costco the first Saturday in May, to let them know that we don't think that's acceptable, what they're doing, pulling his product. Number 8, study the history of your state and your community to instill within your children, your grandchildren, a love and appreciation for the heritage of their state. Maybe if they understand the history of their state, they're less inclined to want to vandalize their state. And also tell them of your ancestry. Me and my little girl who's 13, we watched the other night that movie Harriet, you know, Harriet Tubman. It came out in 2019. It was so inspiring. We researched her. She's from Maryland, where we live. There's a museum on her an hour away. So we're going to be going to the Harriet Tubman Museum. So get to know your state and tell the history of your ancestry. I don't know, girls, if you're familiar with The Chosen. It's a TV series that came out last year about, so good, about the life of Christ. And they're on the second season now. We've been waiting anxiously for the second season. So we watched the 3rd episode of the second season the other night, and it shows Mary, and she's sitting around and talking to the disciples about when Jesus was born and what it was like to be his mother and raising him. And, you know, it's mamas that tell the stories of the past that soften the hearts. I would really recommend watching The Chosen and tell those stories of your grandparents that served in the military, and it will soften their hearts. Girls, can I just tell you, one of the moms, Deb Judd, I don't know, Deb, if you're on the call, she's from North Carolina, she reminded me of these excellent books. They're called the Tuttle Twins, and there are 11 books out now. I just grabbed 2 of them. But they now have 6 little cartoons that tell the history of America and our Constitution. And Vivian is going to share the link where you can find these little cartoons, but they're just fresh out new. But these books, like this one, tells how to teach your children the principles of the free market. And they're so easy to teach. They're so good. Just start building your library of I Love America and buying them. This is how to teach Frederick Bastiat's The Law to your children. I mean, you know, that might not be the easiest thing to teach a kid, but the way they break it down with the illustrations and not too many words, I mean, there's so many ways that we can teach our children to love America. It doesn't have to be just pull out the Constitution and start reading it to them. So I would really recommend the Tuttle Twin books. There's 11 books out now, and I think it's under Vid Angel, the same people that helped produce The Chosen, do these little 6 new cartoons. And so I'm going to be finding those and watching those with my kids and hopefully my grandkids someday. Run for office, girls. I know that's like the scariest thing in the world, but I have to tell you something. I've never wanted to run for office. People have always said, Julene, you should run for office. I'm like, no way, I don't know, no way. I want you to know this last time I've been teaching this now for 10 years, a feeling has come into my heart that I might have to run for office, and I don't really want to do it. But you know, girls, as we keep studying and we keep at this, the Lord will somehow give us the courage. And, you know, Samantha Hall is running. She's one of our moms. She's running for the school board. And I think she probably felt that way too. Like, no, maybe a couple of years ago, you would have been like, no, thank you. But God has got it in her heart and she's doing it. She's gonna, I'm just waiting for her to tell me when I can come up so I can start going door to door, because she only lives a couple hours from me in Pennsylvania. But girls, we might have to do some things that we thought, oh, we would never do. Run for a school board office, run for a city council, run for a little commission in your community. And 9, it says, don't be tempted to promote entitlement revenue. We could talk a lot about that, but we're not going to, girls. But my husband said, Julene, welfare crushed the Black community because it encouraged women to marry the government and it made the man in work redundant. Why get married when I can get all the benefits I need from the government? Same with the entitlement checks that we're getting now, girls. Oh my gosh, they're using that, might use that as an excuse to reset our economy and take our property for people that are in debt. I mean, you just, or look about the subsidies that were given to farmers decades ago, where now if you take the money, then the government can tell you what kind of crop you can grow, how much you can grow, how much you can sell, how much you have to throw away. I mean, just resist these programs that will give you free money, because it's not free. And lastly, promote the concept that it is imperative that our laws are based on biblical morality. When the irreligious rule, the people mourn, for their laws legislate immorality, which ultimately produces unhappiness. I'm telling you, wickedness is not happiness. In contrast, when righteousness rules, people rejoice because their laws are based on moral principles, and moral principles ultimately produce peace and contentment and prosperity. Many people are saying that, we become the victim of political correctness. They're afraid to speak up because they'll be, termed a racist or a white supremacist or a hater or something. And so we've been muzzled, it's better just to be neutral and say, hey, if it's not hurting me, it's okay. I don't care what my neighbor does, kind of thing. But, that is not what God has told us. There's that beautiful example in Moses. Remember when Moses goes up to Mount Sinai to get the law? And while he's gone, 1% of the people, there was about 3 million people that made that exodus out of Egypt. 1%, primarily the men, that's about 3,000 of the Israelites, began to participate in debauchery, just wickedness in front of women and children and with women and children. So when Moses came down, God told them to kill those people. But the rest of the 99.9% were penalized. And you know why the Israelites were penalized? They didn't get the higher law because they sat by and didn't say anything. They were apathetic. And, God says right there, look, I don't like when my children are lukewarm. It talks about that in Revelation. I spew you out of my mouth because I can't use you if you're not willing to declare truth and righteousness, and that's what apathy does. And so, let's not be afraid to speak up because we don't want to be judged or labeled. And same with our fighting for our country and our Constitution. we're going to be under condemnation if we allow it to be destroyed without doing our part, without speaking up and doing something in our families or our communities or our state and our nation. And so remember that beliefs and feelings do not give us automatic license to perform. I could say so much about that. Benjamin Franklin came up with this idea. He was known as the father of morality, the golden patriot, Benjamin Franklin. But there has been more money spent to destroy his reputation than all the founding fathers combined. They like to talk about these 14 illegitimate children he had and what a womanizer. This is all false. If you can malign the golden patriot and not listen to his words on virtue and honesty and morality, that's what they wanted to do. They want you to believe that nowadays that, follow your heart. Even Disney says that, follow your heart, do whatever you feel your heart is telling you to do. So when our kids come to us, you can say, yeah, it's normal to have feelings, but we have to keep those feelings within the bounds that God has given us. So what do you say if one of your sons comes to you and says, I have feelings for another boy? Or, a girl says, I have feelings for another girl. Or what do we say when a man says, I have feelings for another woman who's not my wife? Well, we teach our children that feelings are normal, but we train them that we keep our feelings. We don't act upon our feelings. We keep them under control. Feelings, if we act upon every feeling we have, it can be so destructive. We keep our feelings within the bounds that God has established. That's how you know what to do with your feelings, how to perform or act on them or not. Are they in keeping with what God says is best and right? And so this idea that, that my feelings give me license to perform is completely false. And we need to teach our children that as well. So girls, our summary here, it's important to understand the healing of America. Girls, I want fireworks to go off while I'm saying this almost, because it's so easy to get discouraged watching the news. To think, oh my word, how can we ever turn this around? Well, we can't, because we progress so far down the road of destruction as a nation that it will be impossible, girls, to restore America and the Constitution without the assistance of God. There's no way. So when Bob Woodson had to talk my husband off the ledge today, he reminded him that it is with God that we're going to prevail. We're going to be David against a Goliath, but it's going to be a God thing. But he is going to require us to be involved at these different levels that we've been talking about, at a personal, at a family, a community, and state level. Next week, we're going to talk about how we can get involved in healing the Constitution, primarily learning what's wrong and then holding the feet of our legislators, holding their feet to the fire. And then lastly, what we can do economically. Look, this is too big for us to fix. God is going to have to do it. And as we get involved, we will justify the heavens if enough of us can wake up. He is bound to step in and heal our land. Girls, I've given you a lot of different little ideas to heal. This seminar has our community and our state. I need you to go back and read this in the next 48 hours and to be prayerful about what's something I could do to be a part of the solutions that we've talked about. You wouldn't be here on this call if you weren't solution oriented. So I have all the confidence in the world that God will somehow prick your heart. The story of America is for us to be unafraid. That is the history and the line of great men and women we come from. And God has said in Isaiah, the weapons that have been formed against you, and we know that there are enemies that are tooling against us in this country and God, the weapons that have been formed against you will not prosper, is what God said in the scripture. But he's saying you need to hold the line. You need to hold the ground. We need to stand up and push back and fight, or we're going to lose what we have. The weapons of warfare, I believe that God has given us, particularly mothers, is prayer and then action. There is no doubt that God loves liberty. He says that in I think it's Second Corinthians, I think, where the spirit of liberty, where there is liberty, there is the spirit of God. God loves maximum freedom, because when there's maximum freedom, that means we can fully worship him and tap into his light and his healing and his power when we can worship and live, these beautiful biblical principles. So we got to get him back in the game, girls. And we do that through praying morning and night, and then getting up and doing something and serving. Because what that does is that turns on and evokes a covenant with God. When we're praying and saying, God, help me to know what to do, it opens our hearts and our brains to heaven. And we want to repent. We want to get our marriages right. We don't want to be mad at people. We want to forgive. We want to do something. We want to serve. And you have mamas that are doing that, and God will be bound. He will run to our aid. We will justify the heavens, and he will turn this country around, and he will save it, and he will heal it, and he will get it back to the place that it needs to be. And so, girls, this is our lesson today.